When homeless teenager Marcus Wilson frantically warns wealthy businessman James Henderson about his wife's murder attempt, it sets off a chain of revelations that forces the prestigious Henderson family to confront 3 generations of buried secrets. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The mahogany double doors of the Henderson mansion slammed with enough force to rattle the crystal chandelier in the foyer. James Henderson strode down the curved driveway, his Italian leather shoes crunching against the gravel with each determined step. His face was flushed from the argument, his normally perfect silver hair disheveled from running his hands through it in frustration. "I won't discuss this anymore, Diana," he shouted over his shoulder, though the thick doors muffled any response his wife might have made. The argument had started over breakfast, something about Diana's excessive spending and her sudden interest in James's business affairs. But it had escalated into accusations about trust and control that left both of them seething. James jabbed the key fob, and his Mercedes chirped in response. He needed to get to the office, to bury himself in work until this latest marital spat blew over. Diana had been increasingly erratic lately, but he chalked it up to the stress of Rachel's upcoming visit. His daughter from his first marriage had never warmed to Diana, and the tension whenever they were together was palpable. From the second-floor window of their bedroom, Diana Henderson watched her husband's retreat. Her manicured fingers traced patterns on the glass, her wedding ring catching the morning light. Her face remained carefully neutral, but her eyes tracked James's every move with an intensity that would have unsettled him had he looked up. The Mercedes purred to life, and James began backing down the circular driveway. His mind was already on his morning meetings when movement caught his eye. A figure sprinting toward his car, arms waving frantically. James's foot moved to the brake, more from surprise than conscious decision. The figure was a young man, probably in his late teens, wearing clothes that had seen better days. His dark hair was unkempt, and desperation was written across his features. James's first instinct was to drive away. This was exactly the kind of situation his security system was meant to prevent. But something in the young man's expression made him hesitate. "Mr. Henderson, please, you have to stop." The teenager's voice cracked with urgency. "It's about your car, your wife, please." James's finger hovered over the button to raise his windows, but again, something stopped him. Perhaps it was the way the boy's eyes darted between James and the second-floor window, or the genuine fear in his voice. "Who are you? How did you get past security?" James demanded through the partially opened window. "My name's Marcus. I work at Ted's garage on 5th Street. Please, you need to get out of the car. The brakes, someone tampered with them." "I saw Dash." Marcus glanced up at the window again, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I saw who did it." James's hand tightened on the steering wheel. "That's ridiculous. This car was serviced at the dealership last week. Someone got to it after that." Marcus stepped closer, his voice urgent but low. "Please, Mr. Henderson, I wouldn't make this up. I've been watching the house, trying to catch you before Dash." He cut himself off, swallowing hard. Inside the house, Diana's figure had disappeared from the window. James found himself scanning the driveway, suddenly aware of how exposed they were. The boy, Marcus, noticed his glance and nodded slightly. "Can we talk somewhere else? Please? I'll explain everything, but not here." Before James could respond, the house's front door opened. Diana emerged, her heels clicking on the marble steps. She had composed herself, her designer outfit immaculate, her smile perfect, but there was something tight around her eyes. "James, darling, is everything all right? Who's this?" Her voice carried across the driveway, pleasant but clipped. Marcus stepped back from the car, his face paling. "Check the brakes, Mr. Henderson," he whispered quickly, "but don't let her know you're checking." Diana was halfway down the driveway now, her pace measured but purposeful. James made a split-second decision. "Get in," he told Marcus, unlocking the passenger door. To Diana, he called out, "Everything's fine, dear. Just a misunderstanding with a local kid. I'll handle it." He pulled away before Diana could reach them, watching in his rearview mirror as she stood in the driveway, her smile fading. The last thing he saw before turning onto the main road was Diana pulling out her phone, her fingers moving rapidly over the screen. "Ted's garage." James said as they drove, his voice steady despite his racing thoughts. "We're going there now, and you're going to tell me exactly what you saw and why you've been watching my house." Marcus nodded, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "Yes, sir, but—" He glanced at the speedometer, which was climbing as James's foot pressed harder on the accelerator. "Maybe slow down a bit? Just in case I'm right about the brakes." James eased off the gas, his mind spinning. The argument with Diana, her recent interest in his business affairs, her quick appearance outside. It all seemed different now, colored by this strange warning. But Marcus's next words stopped his thoughts cold. "There's something else you need to know, Mr. Henderson, about why I was really watching your house. It's not just about the brakes. It's about your family, your brother's family. Actually, 2 police officers sat in the Henderson mansion's formal living room, their presence incongruous among the expensive artwork and antique furniture. Detective Sarah Martinez balanced a notepad on her knee while her partner, Detective Robert Chin, studied Diana Henderson's composed expression. "Mrs. Henderson, could you walk us through your activities last night between 8 p.m. and midnight?" Martinez's tone was professional, but her eyes missed nothing, including the slight tightening of Diana's perfectly painted lips. "Of course." Diana adjusted her silk blouse, her movements deliberate. "I had my book club until 9:30 p.m. at Caroline Mitchell's house. You can verify that with any of the members. I came straight home afterward and was in bed by 10:15. James was working late at the office, as usual." She added the last part with just a hint of resentment. "And you didn't leave the house after that?" Chun pressed, making a note on his phone. "Why would I? Is this about James's absurd accusations? Because I can assure you, the idea that I would tamper with his car is completely ridiculous." Diana's laugh was practiced, elegant, but didn't quite reach her eyes. Martinez leaned forward slightly. "Mrs. Henderson, how did you know the accusation involved car tampering? We haven't mentioned that detail yet." The silence that followed was heavy. Diana's hand moved to her throat, touching her pearl necklace, a nervous gesture quickly suppressed. "James must have mentioned it during our argument this morning. Or perhaps that homeless boy who's been spreading these vicious lies told other people. Word travels fast in this neighborhood." While the detectives continued their questioning, James sat in his office downtown, staring at his computer screen. The document displayed made his stomach turn. His life insurance policy, updated 3 weeks ago. The coverage had been doubled, with Diana as the sole beneficiary. His signature was at the bottom, but he had no memory of signing it. "Mr. Henderson?" His assistant's voice came through the intercom. Ted's Garage sent over their report. James buzzed her in, accepting the sealed envelope with hands that weren't quite steady. The mechanical inspection results were clear. The brake lines had been professionally tampered with, the damage done in a way that would have caused them to fail catastrophically after approximately 20 minutes of use. His phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Need to talk. More proof. Meet where we discussed." Before James could respond, another message came through, this one from Diana. "Darling, I hope you're not taking this ridiculous situation seriously. Come home early tonight? We need to talk." James stared at the 2 messages, his mind racing back to the conversation he'd had with Marcus at the garage. The boy had been nervous but specific, describing how he'd seen someone working on James's car in the pre-dawn hours. He'd been sleeping rough in the alley behind the garage, he'd explained, which was why he was there to witness it. But there had been something else in Marcus's expression when he talked about the Henderson family, something that suggested he knew more than he was saying. James had pressed him on it, but Marcus had clammed up, insisting they needed more proof before he could explain further. A knock on his office door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called, quickly minimizing the insurance document on his screen. Rachel, his daughter from his first marriage, walked in. She hadn't been expected until next week, and her early arrival, combined with her grim expression, sent a fresh wave of unease through James. "Dad, we need to talk about your Boy Scout." Rachel's voice was tight with suspicion. "This Marcus person? His timing is a little too convenient." "What do you mean?" Rachel pulled out her phone, pulling up a social media profile. "I did some digging. He's been in and out of foster homes since he was 3. He has a juvenile record, sealed, but I have contacts who owe me favors. And guess what? He's been in town for exactly 2 months, right around the time Diana started acting strange. James frowned. You think he's working with Diana? I think someone's playing a very elaborate game, and you're the mark. Rachel perched on the edge of his desk. The question is Marcus trying to warn you about Diana, or is Diana using him to set up some sort of scheme? Either way, the timing stinks. He seemed genuine about the brake tampering, James mused. The garage confirmed it. Maybe that's what makes him such a good player. Rachel's expression softened. Dad, I know things with Diana have been strained lately, but don't let this kid manipulate you just because you want to believe Diana's capable of. She trailed off. Of trying to kill me? James finished quietly. Before Rachel could respond, James's phone buzzed again. Another text from Marcus. Check Diana's call history. Focus on the nights she said she was at book club. And ask yourself why she changed your life insurance without telling you. James looked up at his daughter. How did you really find out about Marcus? Rachel's hesitation was brief but noticeable. What do you mean? You weren't due here until next week. Yet you show up today with a full background check on a boy you shouldn't have known existed. James's voice was carefully neutral. Who told you about him? Diana called me, Rachel admitted. She's worried about you, Dad. Says you've been acting paranoid, listening to street kids with wild stories. James stood, gathering his coat. Come with me. There's something I need to check at home, and I want you there when I do. What are we looking for? Evidence, James replied grimly. One way or another, someone is lying. And I think it's time we found out who. The Henderson Mansion's dining room had never felt so suffocating. Crystal glasses caught the late afternoon light, casting prism patterns across the white tablecloth while 5 people sat in tense silence. James at the head of the table, Diana to his right, Rachel to his left, and Marcus, cleaned up but clearly uncomfortable in borrowed clothes, sat beside Rachel. The empty chair at the far end seemed to mock them all. I can explain everything, Diana said, breaking the silence. Her fingers traced the stem of her untouched wine glass. This boy is clearly working with your children, James. Think about it. Rachel shows up early, right after he appears. It's all too convenient. Rachel's laugh was sharp. That's rich, coming from you. Dad, she's deflecting. When you were at the office, I found something interesting in Diana's study. You went through my private things? Diana's composure slipped for a moment, real fear flashing across her face. Rachel, James warned, but his daughter was already pulling out her phone. Did you know Diana's been meeting with your kid's trust fund manager? Several times over the past month. Interesting timing, considering she also updated your life insurance. Rachel's words hung in the air like smoke. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his eyes darting between the family members. He looked like he wanted to bolt, but something kept him seated. It's not what you think, Diana said quickly. James, your children have been trying to undermine me from the day we married. This is just their latest attempt. They've never accepted me as part of this family. Because you never wanted to be part of the family, Rachel shot back. You wanted the Henderson name, the money, the social position, just like you wanted Dad's brother before Dash. She stopped abruptly, color draining from her face. The silence that followed was deafening. What about my brother? James's voice was dangerously quiet. Diana's hand shook as she reached for her wine glass, knocking it over. Red wine spread across the white tablecloth like blood. Rachel doesn't know what she's talking about. She was a child when Thomas died. She's imagining things. Am I? Rachel pulled an envelope from her bag. I found these in your study. Letters from Uncle Thomas, dated right up until his death. Care to explain? Marcus suddenly stood, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. I should go. Sit down, James commanded, not taking his eyes off his wife. Diana, explain the letters. Diana's perfect composure cracked. Your brother and I, we were close. Before I met you. It didn't mean anything. He was helping me through a difficult time. Difficult time? Rachel's voice dripped with sarcasm. Is that what we're calling it now? Rachel, James warned again, but his daughter wasn't finished. Mom knew, Rachel said quietly. My mother knew about you and Uncle Thomas, didn't she? Diana's silence was answer enough. That's why she was so upset that last year, wasn't it? Before she? Rachel's voice caught. Before the accident. James stood slowly, bracing his hands on the table. Diana, what exactly did my first wife know? Nothing. Diana's response came too quickly. Sarah suspected things, made accusations, but she had no proof. She was unhappy in the marriage, James. She was seeing threats everywhere. Marcus cleared his throat. Everyone turned to look at him, as if they'd forgotten he was there. The letters, he said quietly. There's more to them than just friendship. Isn't there, Mrs. Henderson? Diana's eyes locked onto Marcus with an intensity that made him flinch. Who are you? She whispered. Really? Because you're not just some homeless boy who happened to see someone tampering with James's car. Marcus swallowed hard. No, ma'am. I'm not. Then who are you? James demanded. Before Marcus could answer, Diana suddenly gasped. Her eyes were fixed on Marcus's arm, where his borrowed shirt had ridden up slightly, revealing a distinctive mark on his skin. That birthmark, Diana breathed. It's impossible. Rachel looked between Diana and Marcus, confusion turning to dawning realization. Dad, she said slowly, remember how Uncle Thomas had that same mark? The one that looked like a crescent moon? James stared at the mark on Marcus's arm, then at his wife's pale face. Diana, he said, his voice deadly quiet. What exactly was in those letters from my brother? Diana's composure shattered completely. She pushed back from the table, standing so quickly her chair toppled over. I can't do this, she said, backing away. I can't. You don't understand. None of you understand. I did what I had to do. What exactly did you have to do? James stepped toward her. Diana turned and fled the dining room, her heels clicking rapidly across the marble floor. They heard the study door slam shut, followed by the distinct sound of a lock turning. Rachel moved to follow, but James held up a hand to stop her. No, he said. First, I want to hear what Marcus has to say. Everything. Starting with that birthmark, and exactly why he's been watching my house. Marcus looked down at the wine-stained tablecloth. It's a long story, Mr. Henderson, and once I tell you, nothing will ever be the same for your family. I think, James said, sinking back into his chair, that ship has already sailed. Talk. Marcus sat in the Henderson family study, surrounded by generations of wealth displayed in leather-bound books and oil paintings. His fingers traced the crescent-shaped birthmark on his arm unconsciously as he spoke. The Henderson Shipping Company started in 1952, he said quietly, eyes fixed on a painting of the original docks. Your grandfather expanded it during the oil crisis of '73 by undercutting his competitors. The company almost went bankrupt in '89 when your father tried to expand too quickly into Asia. But Thomas, your brother, convinced him to pull back and focus on domestic routes. James leaned forward in his leather chair. Anyone could research that history. The company's Christmas party in 1992, Marcus continued as if James hadn't spoken. Thomas got drunk and punched the harbor master for making a pass at one of the secretaries. The family kept it quiet by paying off the harbor master's gambling debts. Rachel exchanged glances with her father. That incident wasn't in any public record. The weekend cabin in Vermont, Marcus went on. The one where Thomas used to go when he needed to think. The one with the carved initials under the kitchen window, TH and DM. He looked directly at the study door where Diana had fled. Diana Mitchell, before she became Diana Henderson. James's hands gripped the arms of his chair. How do you know these things? Because Thomas told me, Marcus said simply. Not directly, but through these. He pulled a worn notebook from his backpack. I found it at my last foster home. My birth mother left it there for me. Rachel took the notebook, opening it carefully. Her eyes widened as she read. Dad, these are Uncle Thomas's journal entries. About Diana. About. She swallowed hard. About a baby. James stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Diana and Thomas had a child? Had one, Marcus confirmed quietly. Gave one up. Me. The silence in the room was thick enough to cut. Outside the study, They heard the faint sound of Diana's heels pacing in the hallway. "The timing doesn't make sense," Rachel said, flipping through the journal. "These entries, they're from when Diana was already married to Dad." "The last entry is dated 3 months before Thomas's death," Marcus pointed out. 9 months before I was born." James turned from the window, his face ashen. "Diana was 3 months pregnant when we got married," she said. He closed his eyes. "She said it was a mistake from her previous relationship, that she'd lost the baby early in the pregnancy." "She didn't lose it," Marcus said softly. "She gave it up. Gave me up. The social workers told me my birth mother came from money, that she'd set up a trust fund for me that I could access at 21. I started digging, trying to find her. Found Thomas's journal instead." Rachel was still reading, her face growing increasingly troubled. "Dad, there's more. These entries. Thomas was investigating something about the company. Something about missing funds and forged documents. He mentioned Sarah, my mom, several times. Says she was helping him." James went very still. "Sarah died in a car accident 2 weeks before Thomas's suicide." "Was it suicide?" Marcus asked quietly. The journal entries stopped mid-sentence. "The last thing written is Diana knows. Have to tell James before dash." He gestured at the blank page that followed. A sharp crack made them all jump. Diana stood in the doorway, the broken door handle in her manicured hands. Her perfect makeup was streaked with tears. "He was going to ruin everything," she whispered. "All my careful plans. Years of waiting, of positioning myself. He was going to tell you about the baby, about the money, about all of it." "Diana," James's voice was heavy with warning. "Do you know what it's like?" She continued as if she hadn't heard him. "To love someone who only sees you as his little brother's mistake? To carry his child while marrying his brother for revenge? To watch that self-righteous Sarah piece it all together? Mom knew." Rachel's voice cracked. "Before her accident?" Diana's laugh was hollow. "Sarah knew everything. She confronted me about the embezzlement, about Thomas, about the baby. She was going to tell you, James. Just like Thomas was going to tell you. I couldn't let that happen." "The car accident," James said slowly. "Sarah's accident. It wasn't an accident at all, was it?" Diana's fingers tightened on the broken door handle. "I did what I had to do. Just like with Thomas. Just like I tried to do with you. Because you never really loved me, James. I was always just second best. Thomas's cast off. Sarah's replacement." "Mrs. Henderson," Marcus stood slowly, holding up his hands. "Think about what you're saying." "You," Diana's eyes fixed on him with a strange mixture of love and hatred. "You were supposed to stay lost. The one secret that actually stayed buried. Until you had to play hero and ruin everything." She backed away from the door. "I have nothing left to lose now. Nothing except—" Her hand moved to her jacket pocket. "Diana," James's voice was sharp with warning. "What's in your pocket?" "Insurance," she whispered, pulling out a small revolver. "One last insurance policy." The study air grew thick with tension as Diana leveled the revolver at James. Her hand was steady, too steady for someone supposedly acting out of desperation. This wasn't an impulsive action. She'd planned for this moment. "Everyone, sit down," Diana commanded, using her free hand to wipe away tears while keeping the gun trained on James. "It's time for a family meeting. A real one, with all the truth on the table." Rachel moved protectively toward her father, but James shook his head slightly, motioning her back. Marcus remained perfectly still, his eyes fixed on Diana with an unsettling intensity. "You want the truth?" Diana's laugh was brittle. "Let's start 25 years ago. I was 19, working as an intern at Henderson Shipping. Thomas was the first person who ever treated me like I mattered. He was married then. Did you know that, James? A starter wife. Someone he married straight out of college to please your father." James's face registered surprise. "Thomas was never married." "Oh, the Henderson family is very good at erasing inconvenient histories," Diana said bitterly. "Just like they erased me when Thomas ended things. His wife found out about us, threatened to go public. Your father arranged a quick, quiet divorce and a very generous settlement. Thomas was ordered to end our relationship." She moved to the desk, picking up a framed photo of Thomas. But we couldn't stay away from each other. We met in secret for years. Even after he introduced me to you, James. Even after you and I started dating. He was supposed to be my future, but your father threatened to disinherit him if he didn't end things permanently. So you married me for revenge, James said quietly. I married you because I was pregnant with his child, and he was too weak to stand up to your father. Corruption that killed Thomas. Was that not love? Silence fell as they all absorbed that. The difference, James finally said, is that you were fighting against the corruption. Diana was enabling it. Until she wasn't, Marcus pointed out. Until she chose to testify, to sacrifice everything to protect us in the end. Rachel sank into a chair. So what do I tell them? That my stepmother was both victim and villain? That she loved us and betrayed us in the same breath? Tell them the truth, Sarah said. All of it. The good and the bad. Let the jury see the whole picture. A family torn apart by secrets, trying to protect each other in all the wrong ways. And what about loyalty? Rachel asked. Doesn't family loyalty mean anything? Loyalty doesn't mean blind acceptance, James said. Sometimes the most loyal thing you can do is hold people accountable for their actions. Marcus stood, moving to the window Rachel had vacated. Tomorrow, we all get new names, new lives. Diana goes into federal custody to testify against the people who've controlled this family for generations. The Henderson name itself might not survive this. Maybe it shouldn't, James said quietly. Maybe it's time for a fresh start. A chance to build something new, something honest. Sarah touched Rachel's shoulder gently. Whatever you decide to testify, remember, the goal isn't punishment. It's truth. It's breaking the cycle of secrets and lies that's poisoned this family for generations. Rachel looked at each of them in turn. Her father with his weary eyes, her mother who'd sacrificed everything to protect her, her cousin who'd risked his life to save them all, and thought of Diana, sitting in a cell somewhere, finally choosing truth over protection. Okay, she said finally. I'll testify, but I'm telling everything. How she loved us and betrayed us. How she tried to protect us by destroying us. How she was both the best and worst stepmother anyone could have. That's my girl, Sarah whispered. A knock at the door made them all jump. Agent Torres entered, looking grim. It's time. We need to move you to separate locations now. The Henderson estate was just burned to the ground. They're sending a message. James stood. How long do we have? To say goodbye? 5 minutes. Make them count. The family looked at each other. Years of lies and love, betrayal and protection, all coming down to these last moments together. Whatever happens, Marcus said, we're still family, no matter what names they give us. Rachel moved to hug him fiercely. Family protects each other. The right way this time. As agents began moving into position, the Hendersons shared one last moment of unity. Tomorrow they would be scattered, renamed, reborn. But for now, they were simply family, flawed, damaged, but finally, truly honest with each other. 6 months into witness protection, the family therapist's office became their only point of connection. Through secure video links from 4 different states, the Hendersons, now bearing different surnames, gathered weekly to begin the long process of healing. Let's talk about trust, Dr. Elena Martinez said, her face centered on their screens. Who would like to start? James, now living as Richard Collins in Arizona, spoke first. I keep thinking about signs I missed, not just with Diana, but with my father, with the company. I don't trust my own judgment anymore. That's normal, Dr. Martinez assured him. When our fundamental beliefs about family and trust are shaken, we question everything. Rachel, now Sarah Johnson in Oregon, scoffed. At least you only missed the signs. I actively helped Diana cover her tracks. All those times I defended her to my friends, insisted she was a good stepmother. She glanced at her mother's video window. While my real mother was out there alone, Sarah, using her new identity as Patricia Wilson, leaned closer to her camera. Rachel, you couldn't have known. None of us saw the whole picture. Marcus did, Rachel pointed out. Marcus, now David Green in Colorado, shook his head. I only saw pieces. Enough to know something was wrong, but not enough to understand how deep it went. Even now, knowing everything, he paused. I still can't hate her. Diana, my mother. You don't have to hate her, Dr. Martinez said gently. Feelings toward family members, especially in complex situations like this, don't have to be all or nothing. She killed my father, Marcus said quietly, or at least let him die. But she also spent years trying to protect me in her own twisted way. How do I reconcile that? The same way I'm trying to reconcile 15 years of thinking my mother was dead, Rachel replied. One day at a time. Sarah wiped away tears. Rachel. No, Mom, I need to say this. Rachel took a deep breath. I understand why you did what you did. I even understand why Diana did what she did. Everyone was trying to protect someone, but the protection became poison. The lies became a cancer eating away at all of us. James nodded. The company my grandfather built, that my father corrupted, that I failed to save. It was all built on that same toxic foundation. Protection through control. Love through lies. And now? Dr. Martinez prompted. Now we're scattered across the country, Marcus said, living under fake names, looking over our shoulders. But at least we're being honest with each other. Honesty is crucial for healing, Dr. Martinez agreed. But so is forgiveness. Not just of others, but of ourselves. I keep visiting Diana, Marcus admitted. In federal custody. The agents hate it, have to arrange special security, but she's still my mother. And watching her try to make amends, testifying against people who could easily have her killed, it means something. Rachel's face softened. How is she? Broken, remorseful, but also lighter somehow. Like telling the truth finally set her free. Marcus touched his birthmark unconsciously. She talks about Thomas, my father, differently now. Not as some grand tragic love story, but as two damaged people who made terrible choices. And your grandfather? Dr. Martinez asked James, still denying everything. His lawyers are fighting every charge. But Diana's testimony, combined with Sarah's evidence, it's solid. The empire's crumbling. Sarah spoke up. The FBI found 3 more shell companies last week. The corruption went deeper than even I knew. Thomas? He died trying to expose only the tip of the iceberg. But his death wasn't meaningless, Marcus said firmly. Everything that's happening now, the truth finally coming out, it all started because he tried to do the right thing in the end. Like Diana is trying to do now, Rachel acknowledged reluctantly, even if it's too late for some things. It's never too late for healing, Dr. Martinez said. Yes, your family has been fractured. Yes, trust has been broken. But the fact that you're all here, working through this together despite physical separation, shows tremendous courage and commitment to healing. James leaned back in his chair. Henderson Shipping is gone. The Henderson name is disgraced. But maybe the family itself isn't beyond saving. We're more than a name, Sarah said softly. More than a company. More than our mistakes. We're survivors, Marcus added. All of us. Even Diana. Rachel wiped her eyes. A pretty messed up bunch of survivors. But we're facing it together, James said. No more secrets. No more lies. Just family. Whatever that means now. Dr. Martinez smiled. That's what healing looks like. Not erasing the past, but learning from it. Building something new on a foundation of truth rather than deception. As their session wound down, each family member in their separate corners of the country, the distance between them seemed less important than the bridges they were finally building. The wounds were still fresh, the trust still fragile, but for the first time since everything fell apart, hope felt possible. Diana's prison diary lay open on the visitation room table, her elegant handwriting filling page after page with confessions she'd never been able to speak aloud. Marcus read silently while his mother, still beautiful despite prison-issued clothing, watched his face for reactions. I started writing after the second week here, Diana said softly. The therapist suggested it. I didn't know how much I needed to say. Marcus turned another page, reading, Thomas wasn't the great love I pretended he was. He was weak, like me. We enabled each other's worst instincts, called it romance when it was really just two broken people trying to feel powerful in a world that had stripped us of control. Mom, he said quietly, You don't have to share this. I do, Diana insisted. You need to understand, not just what happened, but why. How it all spiraled so far out of control. He continued reading. I blamed James for everything, for taking Thomas's place in the company, for being the good son, for offering me the security Thomas couldn't. But the truth is, James was the only truly innocent one. He loved purely, while Thomas and I loved selfishly. We took and took until there was nothing left but lies. In another state, Sarah sat across from James in a secure FBI facility, sharing her own revelations. I found my old investigation notes, she said, spreading papers across the table. Looking at them now, I can see how obsessed I became. I told myself I was protecting Rachel, building a case, but part of me enjoyed the power of knowing things others didn't. James studied the meticulously documented timeline. You were thorough. I was paranoid, Sarah corrected. Yes, the threats were real. Yes, your father's organization was dangerous, but I let it consume me. I chose the investigation over watching our daughter grow up. You chose to fight corruption, to expose the truth. At what cost? Sarah's voice cracked. I have boxes of evidence, but not a single photo of Rachel's high school graduation. I know every detail of your father's criminal enterprise, but missed 15 years of my daughter's life. Meanwhile, Rachel sat in her therapist's private office, reading her mother's old letters, never sent, recently declassified. Dear Rachel, one began. Today you turned 16. I watched from 3 blocks away as you left for your driver's test. You wore your hair up like I used to. Diana was there, doing what I couldn't, being a mother. I tell myself I'm protecting you, but am I really just proving I'm as much a coward as those I'm fighting? Rachel wiped tears as she read another. I saw you arguing with Diana today. You defended her to your friends, said she was the only mother you needed now. It broke my heart, but it also gave me hope. You learned to love after loss. You're stronger than I ever was. In his Colorado apartment, Marcus typed his own reflections into a secure document. I used to think finding my birth parents would answer everything. Instead, it just revealed more questions. Was Thomas really the victim I imagined? Was Diana the villain? Or were they all just trapped in a cycle of lies that started before I was born? The Henderson fortune was built on secrets. The family name became synonymous with power. But real strength, I'm learning, comes from facing the truth, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. James, in his witness protection housing, wrote his own journal entry. I failed as a brother, never seeing Thomas's pain. Failed as a husband, twice, first with Sarah, then with Diana. Failed as a father, letting Rachel grow up in a web of lies. Failed as an uncle, never knowing Marcus existed. The company, the money, the Henderson legacy. None of it matters compared to those personal failures. But failure isn't the end. Diana's testimony has already brought down 3 major criminal operations. Sarah's evidence is dismantling my father's network piece by piece. Rachel and Marcus are building something new from the ashes of our mistakes. Maybe that's the real Henderson legacy. Not the secrets we kept, but the truth we finally chose to tell. Diana's diary continued. I see James with Marcus now, during supervised visits. He's becoming the father Thomas never could be. Rachel's learning to forgive Sarah, to understand choices made from desperation. They're all healing, growing, moving forward. While I sit here, paying for my crimes, I find myself feeling something unexpected. Hope. Not for forgiveness I don't deserve, but for the family that's emerging from the wreckage I helped create. Thomas jumped that night because he couldn't face the truth. I let him fall because I couldn't face change. But our son, our beautiful, brave boy, he ran toward the truth even knowing it would destroy everything he thought he knew. He's stronger than both his parents combined. And maybe that's the only real legacy worth leaving. As night fell across 4 different states, the scattered members of the former Henderson family each closed their journals, their letters, their confessions. The truth was still unfolding, still painful, but no longer poisonous. Understanding, they were learning, didn't always bring peace, but it did bring possibility. 1 year into witness protection, Marcus stood before the federal parole board, speaking on behalf of his mother. The room was small, sterile, filled with people who knew Diana Henderson only as case number 24 to 789. "I won't pretend what my mother did was right," Marcus said, his voice steady. "She committed crimes, kept secrets that destroyed lives, and has to face the consequences. But in the past year, her testimony has led to 37 arrests, the seizure of over $200 million in criminal assets, and the dismantling of 3 international trafficking networks." The board members studied their files, faces impassive. More importantly, Marcus continued, "She's shown genuine remorse, not just through cooperation with authorities, but through the hard work of understanding and accepting responsibility for her actions." In the witness gallery, Rachel sat beside her father, both there to support Marcus despite their complicated feelings about Diana. Sarah watched through a secure video link, her presence in the room still deemed too risky. The Diana Henderson who committed those crimes was trapped in a web of lies she helped weave, Marcus said. The woman in custody now is different. She's chosen truth over protection, justice over power. She's paying for her mistakes, but she's also working to make amends. James shifted in his seat, remembering his own testimony the week before. He told the board about Diana's transformation, about watching his wife become someone he finally, ironically, could respect, even if he could never trust her again. "I'm not asking you to forget what she did," Marcus concluded. "I'm asking you to recognize what she's doing now, to acknowledge that redemption is possible, even for someone who lost their way as completely as my mother did." The board called a recess to deliberate. In the hallway, Rachel approached Marcus. That was really good," she said awkwardly. "What you said about redemption." Marcus managed a small smile. "Learned it in therapy. Turns out forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing to see the whole person, good and bad. Like Mom choosing to disappear to fight corruption," Rachel nodded. "Or Dad choosing to lose everything to expose the truth. Or you choosing to warn us despite knowing it would change your life forever. We all made choices," James joined them. "Some better than others. The question is, what choices do we make now?" The answer came in stages. The parole board granted Diana restricted release into federal custody, allowing her to continue cooperating with ongoing investigations while beginning supervised rehabilitation. She would never be free in the conventional sense, but she had a chance to keep making amends. Sarah's evidence, combined with Diana's testimony, led to the indictment of Henderson Sr. and 12 other high-ranking conspirators. The family fortune was largely seized, with portions set aside for victim restitution. The Henderson name became synonymous not with power, but with the largest corporate corruption scandal in recent history. Rachel, under her new identity, started a nonprofit supporting children in the foster system. Her work brought her closer to understanding Marcus's experience, and through that, to understanding the choices that had shaped their family. James sold what remained of the legitimate business holdings, using the proceeds to establish trust funds for both Rachel and Marcus. Not to replace what was lost, he explained, but to give them resources to build something new, something honest. Marcus, still bearing Thomas's distinctive birthmark, but no longer haunted by its meaning, began law school. His focus, corporate transparency and accountability. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. Sarah continued her consulting work with the FBI, but made time now for weekly video calls with Rachel. They were building a new relationship, not trying to recapture what was lost. It was slower, harder, but more genuine than either had expected. As Diana's supervised release approached, she made one final request through her lawyers, a family meeting. Not to ask forgiveness, she emphasized, but to share something she discovered in therapy. "I spent years thinking love meant protection at any cost," she wrote in her request. "I'm learning it actually means supporting growth, even when that growth is painful. I'd like to practice that, just once, with the family I helped break." The response surprised everyone, including Diana herself. One by one, they agreed to meet. "We're not doing this for her," Rachel explained to her therapist. "We're doing it for us, to prove we can face the past without being controlled by it." The Henderson legacy was built on secrets, Marcus added in his own session. "Maybe our new legacy can be built on truth." As they prepared for what would likely be their last gathering as a complete family, each member carried their own version of hope. Not for restoration of what was lost, that was impossible, but for construction of something new, something honest, something real. The family court conference room felt too small for the weight of the moment. Diana sat at one end of the long table, her hands folded neatly despite the monitoring bracelet on her wrist. Federal agents stood discreetly by the doors while Judge Gonzalez, the same judge who'd overseen the initial hearing, presided over this unusual gathering. "Mrs. Henderson," the judge began, "you've requested this hearing to make a formal statement of responsibility. Before we proceed, understand that anything you say becomes part of the official record." Diana nodded, then turned to face her family, James, Rachel, Marcus, and Sarah, all present under heavy security. "I understand, Your Honor, and I'm ready." She withdrew a carefully prepared statement, but set it aside untouched. "I wrote something," she said softly, "but it feels wrong now. If I'm truly taking responsibility, it should come from the heart, not a prepared script." James's hand found Rachel's under the table as Diana continued. "I've spent the past year in therapy, cooperating with investigations, trying to understand my own actions. The easy explanation is that I did everything for love. Love of Thomas, love of Marcus, love of power and security. But that's not the whole truth." She took a deep breath. "The truth is, I was a coward. Every step of the way, I chose the easy lie over the hard truth. When Thomas wanted to expose the corruption, I encouraged him to stay quiet. When he died, I let everyone believe it was suicide rather than face my own role in his death. When Sarah discovered the truth, I chose elimination over confession." Sarah's face remained carefully neutral, but her hands clenched in her lap. "I married James not just for revenge, but because he represented safety, the very thing I denied Thomas and Marcus. I played the perfect wife, the grieving sister-in-law, the supportive stepmother, all while orchestrating more lies, more deceptions, more betrayals." Diana's voice caught. "I told myself I was protecting Marcus by keeping him away from this toxic legacy. In reality, I was protecting myself from facing what I'd helped create. When he finally appeared at the mansion, warning James about the brake tampering, it should have been my wake-up call. Instead, I doubled down on deception." She turned to James. "You gave me everything, and I repaid you with betrayal. Not just the attempt on your life, but every day of our marriage was a betrayal because it was built on lies." To Rachel, "You trusted me to fill the void left by your mother's supposed death. I used that trust to manipulate you, to keep you from asking questions that might expose the truth. To Sarah, you tried to help me once, offered a way out when you discovered what was happening with the company. I repaid your compassion by trying to kill you. Finally, to Marcus, my greatest crime was against you, not giving you up. That might have been my one selfless act, sparing you from this legacy of lies. But letting you grow up believing you were unwanted, unloved, that was unforgivable." Judge Gonzalez leaned forward. "Mrs. Henderson, what exactly are you requesting from this court?" "Nothing for myself," Diana replied, "but I've established a trust with all my remaining personal assets. I'm asking the court to administer it for the benefit of families destroyed by corporate corruption, to turn the money I gained through deception into something that might help others find truth and justice." James spoke for the first time. "The money you hid offshore? The accounts we never found?" Diana nodded. "Everything. All the numbered accounts. All the shell companies I personally controlled. The FBI has verified the funds are clean. My private insurance policy, not connected to Henderson Shipping's criminal activities. Approximately $40 million. The judge studied her papers. "And you understand this voluntary forfeiture will not reduce your sentence or obligations to the ongoing investigation?" "I do. This isn't about reducing my punishment. It's about finally doing one completely honest thing. No conditions, no secret agendas, no hidden motives." Rachel's voice was barely audible. "Why now?" "Because I finally understand what real protection looks like," Diana said. "It's not about control or secrets or power. It's about truth, about facing consequences, about trying to heal what you've broken, even knowing some breaks can never be fully repaired." She turned back to the judge. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not even asking for understanding. I'm just asking for the chance to use what I gained through wrong choices to help others make better ones." Marcus stood suddenly. Everyone tensed, but he simply walked to where Diana sat. Slowly, deliberately, he rolled up his sleeve, revealing the crescent birthmark. "Dad died because he couldn't face the truth," he said quietly. "You lived in lies because you thought they would protect us. I spent years running from who I was. Maybe it's time we all stopped running." He turned to the judge. "I support the trust, not for her redemption, but for what it might mean to other families facing impossible choices." One by one, the others nodded their agreement. Judge Gonzalez made her notes, then looked at Diana. "The court accepts your petition. The trust will be established under federal oversight. You'll have no control over or access to the funds. Is this understood?" "Yes, Your Honor." Diana's voice was steady. "It's not about control anymore. It's about finally letting go." As the hearing concluded and Diana was led away by federal marshals, she paused at the door. "I know it's too late for many things," she said softly, "but maybe it's not too late to show Marcus one true thing, that his mother finally learned what love really means. Even if I learned it too late to love him the right way." Marcus stood in the doorway of the Henderson guest house, now his home, watching movers carry in the last of his belongings. After 2 years in witness protection, the immediate danger had passed enough for the family to cautiously rebuild their lives. Not as the Hendersons, that name was too tainted, but as something new. "Need help unpacking?" Rachel asked, appearing beside him with 2 cups of coffee. She'd moved back to the estate last month, taking over the main house's east wing while James occupied the west. "Thanks." Marcus accepted the coffee, noting how easily they'd settled into a sibling-like relationship. "Still feels strange, being here openly. No more watching from the shadows." "No more shadows at all," Rachel corrected. "That's the point." Inside, the guest house bore little resemblance to its former state. Gone were the elaborate furnishings and artwork that had once marked it as Henderson property. Instead, Marcus had created a space that reflected his new path. Law books lined the shelves, a small desk held his study materials, and the walls displayed foster care reform advocacy posters. James appeared at the main house's back door. Diana's rehabilitation officer called. She settled into the halfway house. The mention of Diana no longer brought immediate tension. Time and therapy had helped them all reach a complex peace with her role in their lives. "How's she doing?" Marcus asked. "Better than expected. She's leading a support group for women transitioning from prison. Apparently, she's quite good at helping others face their truths." James managed a small smile. Ironic, considering. Rachel moved to help Marcus unpack a box of books. "Mom's coming for dinner tomorrow. She has news about the foundation." The foundation, built from Diana's surrendered assets, had become Sarah's focus. Working with legal teams and corporate watchdogs, she helped expose corruption while supporting its victims. It was her way of transforming 15 years of investigation into something constructive. "I've been thinking," Marcus said, arranging his law school materials, "about changing my name legally. Not back to Henderson, but maybe something that acknowledges both sides of my heritage. Thomas Wright, maybe, or Marcus Wright Henderson." Rachel paused in her unpacking. "You sure? The Henderson name doesn't have to be about corruption and lies," Marcus said. "What you're doing with your advocacy work, what Mom's doing with the foundation, what I'm hoping to do with corporate law reform, maybe we can redefine what it means." James leaned against the doorframe. "Your father would be proud. Both of you." "All of us," Rachel corrected. "We're all choosing to build something new from the wreckage." Even Diana, in her own way. The guest house's renovation had included a small garden visible from the kitchen window. Sarah had helped design it, incorporating plants that attracted butterflies, symbols of transformation. "The therapist says we're making good progress," Marcus noted, watching a monarch flutter past. "Said it's rare for families torn apart by secrets to rebuild so completely." "We're not rebuilt completely," Rachel said. "We're building something new. Something that includes the truth about the past without being trapped by it." James nodded toward the main house. "Speaking of which, I've been thinking of converting the study, the room where everything came to light, into a family room. No more closed doors, no more private spaces for secrets to grow." Diana asked if she could visit, Marcus said quietly, "once she's completed the rehabilitation program." Not to stay, just to see what we've built. What do you think? Rachel and James exchanged looks. 2 years ago, the suggestion would have been impossible. Now, one step at a time, James said finally. But maybe, we're all learning what real family means. Real trust, real love, without conditions, Rachel added. Without secrets. Marcus touched his birthmark. No longer a symbol of shame, but a reminder of how far they'd come. The guest house has a spare room, he said. I was thinking of registering as a foster parent. For older teens, one's about to age out of the system. Rachel's eyes widened. Really? Why not? I know what it's like to feel lost, to search for belonging. Maybe I can help others find their way home. He gestured around the guest house. It's not the Henderson mansion, but it's better, James finished. It's real. Outside, the butterfly garden bloomed under the late afternoon sun. In the main house, Sarah's familiar footsteps echoed as she arrived early for dinner. The sound of Rachel's laughter floated through the open windows. James watched his expanded, reformed family with quiet amazement. The Henderson legacy of power and secrets was gone. In its place, something stronger grew. A family built on truth, on choices made in light rather than shadow, on love that protected through honesty rather than deception. Marcus smiled, finally feeling at home. New beginnings, he said softly. New beginnings, his family echoed, together. The rehabilitation center's garden was small but well-tended, a stark contrast to the institutional building behind it. Diana sat on a weathered bench, watching Sarah approach through the visitor's entrance. Of all the unlikely developments in the past 3 years, this meeting felt the most surreal. Thank you for coming, Diana said quietly as Sarah took a seat beside her. I wasn't sure you would. Neither was I, Sarah admitted. But Rachel said something that made me think. About how forgiveness isn't about forgetting, but about choosing to move forward. Diana's hands twisted in her lap. I tried to kill you. Yes. Sarah's voice was steady. And then you helped bring down the people who would have killed us all. Life's complicated that way. The garden's small fountain provided gentle background noise as both women sat in contemplative silence. Finally, Diana spoke. How are they? Really? They're healing. James has started mentoring young entrepreneurs, teaching them about ethical business practices. Rachel's advocacy work is gaining national attention. And Marcus? Sarah smiled slightly. Marcus just got approved as a foster parent. Diana's eyes filled with tears. He'll be wonderful at it. He has so much love to give, despite everything we did to him. Not despite, Sarah corrected. Because of. He learned from our mistakes, from our failures. We all did. Inside the center, they could see other residents meeting with family members, all working through their own versions of redemption. Diana had become something of a mentor to newer arrivals, helping them face their truths just as she had faced hers. I've been writing, Diana said. Not just journal entries anymore. A book about corporate corruption, about how power corrupts through small compromises, through choices that seem protective but are really about control. Rachel mentioned it. She's proud of you, you know? Not for what you did before, but for what you're doing now. Diana wiped her eyes. I don't deserve their pride, or their forgiveness. Maybe that's why you're earning it, Sarah said softly. Because you finally understand that it can't be demanded or manipulated. It can only be offered freely. Like you're doing now? I'm trying. Sarah pulled an envelope from her bag. This is from Marcus. He wanted me to give it to you personally. Diana's hands shook as she opened the letter. Inside was a photograph of the guest house's new foster room, ready for its first occupant. The wall featured a framed butterfly collection, specimens Diana had collected in her youth, found in storage and restored by Marcus. He remembers, Diana whispered. That day in the garden, when he was watching the house. I told him about collecting butterflies as a girl, how each one represented a hope for transformation. He's giving those hopes new life, Sarah said, like we all are. A nurse appeared at the garden door, signaling the end of visiting hours. Diana carefully tucked the photo away. Sarah, she said quickly, I know I have no right to ask, but the foundation, is it helping people? It's helping families choose truth over power, justice over protection, love over control. Sarah stood. It's helping create the change you wanted, but couldn't find the right way to make. And James? Does he ever? He's forgiven you, Sarah said gently. Not enough to reconcile, but enough to hope you find peace. We all have. Diana nodded, understanding the gift she was being offered. Not restoration, but recognition. Not absolution, but acceptance. Tell them. She paused. Tell them I'm trying to deserve the chances they've given me, even knowing I never fully can. That's why you deserve them, Sarah replied. Because you finally understand that redemption isn't about erasing the past. It's about creating a better future. As Sarah left through the secure gates, Diana returned to her room. On her small desk lay the draft of her book, its working title simple but profound, The Price of Protection, a story of power, love, and truth. She added a new note to the manuscript. Forgiveness, I'm learning, isn't a destination. It's a journey we take together, one truth at a time. The Henderson legacy wasn't destroyed by honesty. It was transformed by it into something stronger, something real, something worthy of the love we all sought but didn't know how to give. Outside her window, a butterfly landed on the sill, a monarch like the ones in Marcus's frame, symbol of transformation, of hope, of the beauty that can emerge from complete breakdown. Diana watched it take flight, carrying with it the weight of old sins and the promise of new beginnings. Marcus's first foster child arrived on a bright autumn morning. 15-year-old Kyle stood awkwardly in the guest house doorway, a single duffel bag containing his entire life. Behind him, Rachel and James watched as Marcus welcomed the boy who reminded them all so much of his younger self. The room's this way, Marcus said gently. We can personalize it however you want. Kyle's eyes darted around, taking in the butterfly collections, the law books, the family photos that now included both the good times and the hard ones. You live here alone? Not really, Marcus smiled. My family's right next door. You'll meet everyone at dinner. In the main house, Sarah was putting finishing touches on the meal while James organized files in the converted study, now a bright, open family room. The latest news had arrived that morning. Henderson Sr. had been sentenced to 20 years. The last threads of the old corrupt empire were finally being severed. Kyle's case files, Rachel explained, setting a folder on the coffee table. He's been in 8 homes in 3 years. Parents were corporate fraud victims, lost everything when a company collapsed. Sound familiar? Marcus nodded, understanding the symmetry. That's why the placement counselor called us. Called you, Rachel corrected. You're the one they trust to understand. Trust? The word still carried weight in their family. They learned its true value only after losing it completely. Now they built it carefully, deliberately, one honest moment at a time. Sarah appeared in the doorway. Diana's book arrived. Advanced copy. They all looked at the volume she held. The Price of Protection had already generated significant pre-release interest, its unflinching examination of corporate corruption and family loyalty striking a chord with early reviewers. She dedicated it to all of us, Sarah said softly, to the family that taught me the difference between protection and love, and to those still learning that truth is the strongest foundation. Kyle watched their interactions with cautious hope. Are you all really related? You don't look alike. Family's not about looking alike, Marcus explained. It's about choosing to be there for each other, about facing hard truths together. Rachel picked up a framed photo, their first real family picture after everything changed. Diana wasn't in it physically, but her influence was there in the butterfly garden visible through the window, in the strength they'd found through overcoming her deceptions. The foundation approved 10 new grants today, she told Marcus, all for families affected by corporate fraud. Diana's money is finally doing what she claimed she always wanted, protecting people the right way. James joined them, carrying a letter. The FBI's closing the last of the offshore accounts. Henderson Shipping is officially dissolved. Good, Marcus said firmly. Kyle, how about we get you settled before dinner? Tomorrow I can show you the butterfly garden. Maybe you'd like to help maintain it? As Marcus led Kyle to his room, Rachel touched the book's cover thoughtfully. Do you think we'll ever fully recover from everything that happened? I think we already have, Sarah answered. Not by going back to what we were, but by becoming something better. James watched his expanded family, his daughter, his former wife, his nephew-turned-son, and now Kyle, the next chapter in their story of redemption. The Henderson name might be tarnished in the business world, but here, in this space of truth and healing, it had found new meaning. Diana's rehabilitation officer called, he said quietly. She's being considered for early release to a halfway house. Wants to work with other families affected by corporate crime. The news settled over them without the old pain. Time and truth had done their work well. Kyle's birthday is next week, Marcus said, returning. I thought, maybe we could all help him celebrate. Show him what real family looks like. Rachel smiled. With butterflies? With everything. Marcus touched his birthmark. The good and the bad. The whole truth. Sarah began setting the table. Places for all of them, including the empty chair they kept as a reminder, not of what they'd lost, but of how far they'd come. The autumn sun cast long shadows through the windows, but inside, the family gathered in light. Kyle's cautious footsteps echoed upstairs as he explored his new room. In the garden, butterflies danced among the flowers Diana had once loved, now tended by the family she tried to control but ultimately helped free. They were no longer the Hendersons of old, powerful, secretive, corrupt. They were something new, something real, something true. The Thanksgiving table stretched through the Henderson mansion's newly renovated dining room, no longer a place of secrets but of healing. 1 year had passed since everything changed, and the family gathered to celebrate not just the holiday, but their journey. Kyle, now 16 and thriving in Marcus's care, helped Sarah arrange the place settings while Rachel and James brought in dishes. The empty chair remained, not at the head of the table as tradition once dictated, but integrated among the others, a reminder of both loss and growth. The letter arrived this morning, Marcus said, touching the envelope in his pocket. His father's final words, preserved by Diana all these years, had finally been cleared for release by the FBI. Should I read it now? When everyone's here, Rachel suggested, knowing everyone included Diana, joining them via secure video call from her halfway house. Her rehabilitation had progressed enough to allow supervised digital contact, another step in their ongoing journey of reconciliation. The laptop was set up at the table's end, Diana's face appearing on screen precisely at the arranged time. She looked healthier than she had in years, the burden of secrets finally lifted. "Happy Thanksgiving," she said softly, taking in the scene. The family she tried to control, now flourishing in freedom. "The garden looks beautiful. Kyle's done wonders with it," Marcus replied, watching his foster son beam at the praise. "The butterflies stayed late this year." Sarah brought in the last dish, her mother's recipe, a tradition Rachel had missed during the years of separation. "Shall we begin?" They joined hands around the table, Diana's presence connecting them through the screen. James spoke first, his voice steady. "A year ago, we sat in this room as strangers living a lie. Today, we gather as family living in truth. Before we eat, Marcus has something to share." Marcus withdrew the letter, his hands trembling slightly. Kyle squeezed his shoulder in support, the boy understanding better than most the weight of family revelations. "My son," Marcus read, Thomas's words filling the room. "If you're reading this, then the truth has finally come to light. I failed you in life, failed to stand up to my father, failed to protect your mother, failed to be the man you deserved as a father. But in my final days, I learned something crucial. Protection without truth isn't love at all." Diana's quiet tears were visible on screen as Marcus continued. "The Henderson legacy was built on lies. Lies we told the world, lies we told each other, lies we came to believe ourselves. But you, my son, you carry a different legacy. The birthmark we share isn't a curse of secrecy, but a sign of hope. Hope that one generation can learn from the failures of the last." Rachel held her mother's hand tightly as the letter continued. "I'm leaving you everything I know about the company's corruption, about your grandfather's crimes, about the choices that led us here. Not to burden you, but to free you. The truth is a heavy gift, but it's the only one worth giving." James closed his eyes, hearing his brother's voice in the words. Diana loves you in her way. She's trapped in the same web of lies that snared me, but her love for you is real. Perhaps the only real thing in this false world we built. James will be a better father than I could have been. Sarah knows the whole truth. Trust her. And Rachel, she'll be the sister you should have had from the beginning. Kyle listened intently, understanding his own place in this tapestry of healing. I leave you not with an apology. Those are empty without action, but with hope. Hope that you'll build something better than we did. Something true. Something worthy of the love we never learned to give properly. Marcus's voice grew stronger as he reached the end. The butterflies in Diana's garden. I used to watch her collect them, marveling at how something so fragile could transform into something so free. Be free, my son. Transform our legacy of lies into something beautiful. That's all any father could hope for. The letter complete, silence filled the room. Not the heavy silence of secrets, but the peaceful quiet of truth accepted. Diana spoke first. He would be so proud of you. All of you. The family we should have been from the start. We are that family now, Rachel said firmly. Just with more scars. More wisdom. More truth, Sarah added. Kyle looked around the table. At Marcus, who'd given him a home. At Rachel, who'd shown him strength. At James and Sarah, who demonstrated how to rebuild from ashes. And at Diana on the screen, proving change was possible. Is this what real family feels like? He asked quietly. Yes, Marcus answered, touching his birthmark. This is exactly what it feels like. They shared the meal together, the empty chair no longer a void but a bridge between what was and what could be. Outside, late autumn light caught the last butterfly of the season, its wings catching the sun as it rose, free and transformed, into the waiting sky.